Hello, my name is Dr. Neesa with Creative Feminine Rising, where women come together to honor the sacred and explore and expanding into their own creative lives. We utilize art as a tool for that and ceremonial spaces of awakening. So today we're going to be chatting with Tawni Sands, who is one of the authors in the group book called Call of the Mystical Mountain that was inspired through me to bring these incredible people together, Tawni being one of them, to get the word out about this magnificent place we call Mount Shasta and how it activates spiritual knowing and healing. And in Tawni's case, I happen to know from reading her chapter that when she found out about Mount Shasta, she traveled there at least 11 times, hosting retreats in just a couple of years. So we're going to dive into that. I mean, what is it about this mountain that has captivated you so deeply that you write a book chapter about it and you travel all the way from Los Angeles to Mount Shasta, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth? So just open it up with that question for you.
All right. Hi, Nisa. I'm so grateful to be here with you today. What is it about Mount Shasta? Um, it's it's the elevated energy in Mount Shasta that my first experience ever um, traveling there just felt like this massive, deep, like sense of home when I got there. And from what I hear, that's that's not an uncommon experience. And
Right.
so there's something just so special about Mount Shasta, really beyond words. It's like I could talk about how incredible it feels to be there. And then also just the level of experiences that I've had there, the synchronicities, um, in like whether it's meeting people or being led to these different places that have brought forward information to me like on such a deep personal level that I feel like only, really only spirit would know. So, um, there's just such an incredible sacredness to Mount Shasta that has kept me coming back, and also working with groups and um, the with the modalities that I use. It's it's kind of like, I don't know, it just seemed like a no-brainer. Like things are just so much louder in ways for people to hear the messages, um which makes there just it brings in this whole other level of clarity um that I've experienced. So
Yeah, you said in your book, and like kind of right off in the first chapter, that the first time you went there, you felt like the mountain helped you give voice to your message, right? Whatever, and that's I do this because I want to hear like, what is your message? I Anyone who reads the chapter will understand more about your journey, but what do you consider to be your message?
yeah, well, I still even feel like it's been this unfolding, um but I think it's allowed me to share what it is that I'm doing in a more graceful manner. Um, Knowing the more of the spiritual community in Shasta, things that like would seem completely out there to people. In my experience, 15 years ago when I was really first starting off, it was challenging talking to just like any random person about spirituality and like this real sense of truth. Um, so for me, I had had different experiences with wanting to understand things about my health that I wasn't getting clarity from going to the doctor for. And
Mhm.
it really led me down this path of, you know, not obviously, I had had like experiences of knowing pharmaceuticals, and I knew statistics about pharmaceuticals in, I think it was like 2010. And for me, growing up in Christian schooling and all of that, I really believed in healing. And to me, true healing was okay, that like those symptoms aren't there anymore. And there's something way better on the other side of it. So I think the biggest message for me is really just that the truth is there, and that in so many ways we decide how we're going to experience something. And what I love about Mount Shasta too is the elevated energy there. People just naturally tend to set higher intentions for themselves, that I've
Mm.
noticed. And so it's like it shows, it's almost like it shows them this elevated sense of what's possible through their intentions and through their free will of what they're deciding for themselves. And so I ended up going, you know, down my own rabbit hole of healing when it started for me when I was 17, 18. And just through it, I learned so many incredible things. Like God showed me so many powerful things through through not being well or not feeling well. And it really just showed me this truth about how we were created as humans and all of the parts of us that are interconnected. You know, even just like a basic example is knowing that the physical body is connected to the emotional body. Like if someone were to be embarrassed, you know, and their cheeks get red, just it being, it could be so simple if we allow it to be, rather than making it more complicated. And I think the biggest thing too, where I'm like really, what I really see for people, and really I feel like the first part of where we are at in the collective right now is the need, like almost this necessity of no longer consenting to deception, because I feel like that is kind of this place we're at as a collective of, we have this choice of we can choose truth, we can choose what's real, you know, and based on, I feel like what the truth is, when we can all at least like agree to what's true, then I feel like the real work could be done. But it's like when we have all this deceptive energy that's pulling us in different ways or creating, you know, us to fight or to, you know, be, our minds want to be right. It's like, where's the real progress on a collective scale? And
Mm. How do we get there? I mean,
well,
is there something that in your offerings, your work as a practitioner or retreat leading that you do that feels like a solution or a gateway to help people access that inside themselves?
yeah, I mean, at all of my retreats, I definitely assist people in understanding discernment. And also, I think there's even a big piece of this is like the acknowledgement that there's been deception, you know, there's been misidentifications that people have bought into as far as who they believed they are on, in a lower frequency. And so all of my retreats are really just seeking to like clear out and elevate. The elevation I feel like naturally happens when we let go of the things that aren't who we are and aren't our truth.
Mhm. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I believe that I understand what you're saying, but I also feel like there's questions here
Mhm.
to help someone who might be listening to this and not knowing much about uh, true healing and not knowing much about a place like Mount Shasta.
Yeah.
What
So
maybe a story,
what is true
example of
healing?
like, yeah, like what is that? And what
Okay.
is the truth, that people aren't necessarily understanding inside
Yeah.
their own
So
makeup.
so socially what I see is there's been this artificial split of the human, right? Where the mind has been left to psychologists, or study of the mind has been left to psychologists. The study of the soul has been left to the theologians. Study of the body is left to physicians. And so there's naturally this separation of like, well, I need to go to a specialist for this, special kind of thing that I'm experiencing, when that can really just, the symptom can just be the result of a, like a couple different things that are going on in somebody, within somebody, whether it's on a physical level, a mental level, emotional level, spiritual level. And so for me, what I've seen, what I've witnessed is that true healing really comes when the parasympathetic nervous system is in operation, it's in power. And what I've also come to realize and see is that on a cellular level, people's body will remember one or the other being active. So the cells in themselves can get stuck, with the sympathetic nervous system being operating a certain way.
Yeah,
So just to,
sympathetic being the stress response
yeah,
is what you're saying.
survival, fight, flight, paralysis. I mean, there's so many different symptoms that mimic and mirror those states, whether they're cells fighting each other, like cancer does. There's paralysis, right? Like people aren't able to get different movement, or things are bogged down or sluggish. And so it's really fascinating to me. So in my practice, like I just had a session with somebody on being pain free. So I make some statements in finding out how their body responds to being pain free. And I'll first make sure that their body is in resonance with being pain free. Because a lot of times, this is something I've also realized, and something that I was taught by Dr. Valerie, who I learned this practice called Kalos from. And she's still an incredible mentor for me. She's like well in her 80s, and she's not practicing anymore. But she was involved in creating this practice. And what she realized, she was a natural doctor, and what she realized, over 50 years ago, was that she was having people come into her office and doing everything on a physical level, and people still weren't getting well. And
Mhm.
she began to realize that obviously there's a lot more than just the physical in what's going to assist people in moving through or overcoming these challenges that are there for them. And I know, even like the coaching, I've heard people in the coaching industry even talk about this, but there's a really important piece in knowing that everything is working for us, right? And so
Mhm.
when we understand what it is that we consented to that allows us to be having this experience, um, it's so much easier in the sense of like, oh, okay, well, there's my power, and also that's one of our greatest gifts has was our free will that we've been given here. So back to my example. So I was working with someone on being pain free, and so I make some statements. I made sure that she was in resonance with being pain free. And then I run through these different priorities to find out what it is exactly that her body wants to address being pain free first. And so there's 10 priorities I'll test for. Structural, if there's anything, structurally that's out, there's a handful of structural corrections that I'll do with somebody. So structural, exercise and rest. Maybe somebody's not getting enough movement in their body or they're not getting enough rest. And so the body will tell us exactly what that is. Nutritional, something that's like extremely powerful is knowing what foods make you strong and what foods make you weak. And on like really not eating the foods that are going to make you weak. And like everyone is so different, right? We all have a unique fingerprint. And so understanding, just coming back to like knowing thyself, right,
Mm.
is 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 the beauty, I feel like, in honoring the creation as well,
Mm.
and there's a
Mm.
humility in that. So, but what I've seen is some of the healthiest people, like they really know what their foods are. They know what not to eat, and it's just what their body wants, what works well for them. There's cleanse, assisting the body in cleansing things that maybe have gotten stuck, whether it's in the lymphatic system, the blood, the tissue, or the colon. I just focus on those three major areas, and typically the rest of the body cleanses from addressing those three things. Cleanse emotional. So with emotional is we're able to trace back the age at which somebody made a decision that wasn't in resonance with them. And there's different emotional points I can test as well that will tell me kind of what has been trapped or stuck in the body that wants to be released. And then we go back and we'll do a little process with that and make sure that they test for present time after that. Emotional, and then there's emotionally inherited traits. So there's different ways to clear those when they come up. The electrical body, we have three main electrical circuits, and then we have some other electrical things as well. So if that comes up, then I'll test, what's going on, kind of find out where that is. The chakras, sometimes some of the, a chakra can do something a certain way, and so we'll just correct it. And there's spiritual. So if somebody like has a deep calling that they need to be, whether it's communicating with spirit or just listening to like worship music, just something to like have that time to connect in with something greater than that is true for them. Sometimes that comes up. I had a woman who was experiencing like this really bad leg pain, and it was 100% spiritual, and it had to do with like what she was holding against herself in like her walk with God. And so
Mm.
that was really powerful. And then the last one is reactives, which is right and left brain integration. And I actually have like a whole dyslexia free, easy learning program to assist adults and kids in being able to be dyslexic free. And there's two different types of dyslexia. There's the physical dyslexia, and then there's also an emotional dyslexia that happens with people in communication. So, did you catch all that? That was a lot.
Well, if I had to summarize all that,
Yeah.
I would say, number one, that you're doing this testing through what we know as muscle response testing. I've been a chiropractor for 35 years, and so, I know about that world. I know I use those tools myself. And I also know that it's, somewhat controversial in terms of like the world of science. Uh, but ultimately, what you're talking about here in terms of like people understanding truth is that we are these multi-dimensional beings. We're not just a body walking around, but the body is something that expresses all the other layers and levels of who we are. So
Yeah.
it's, I always think of it as like a mystery tour, like, oh, what is it? Let's ask the body. The body will help unravel a lot of things, help us bring into awareness what that is. And I really appreciate that you're doing that work. I mean, it's really work that mirrors my own heart. And having been professional like I have for so long, I just remember in the early days, like 30 years ago, like the kinds of conversations that people are having now in ordinary life about energy and about, trauma and all these things that reflect through the circuitry of the body. It was all kind of taboo. People were like, what are you talking about? I remember this one patient way back in the early years of my practice who said, I was talking to her about the electrical circuitry of the body that was up through the nervous system and the muscle system and then affecting how she was feeling. And she thought I was completely cuckoo. She was just like, yeah, right. Body electric, sure. Anyway, just
Yeah.
aside.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting thing to try to describe to somebody to just what the power of the mind is. It's like, and I get why it's controversial too with muscle testing is because sometimes people are not accurate in their testing. And there can be a few different reasons for that. Um, and so it's important to know how to have accurate testing. And also, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if I'm thinking about what it is that I'm testing on somebody, that like what I'm thinking about isn't always, it's not like anybody else can see that. If
Right,
that
but
makes,
you're influencing things because you're part of the circuit with this other person, no
oh,
matter what. And so
well,
part of
yeah,
the
I
goal
could,
of
I
muscle testing is
definitely,
neutrality, right?
definitely. And that's why, like, really being in alignment with wanting to know what's true for that person rather than allowing any other part of yourself to kind of come in to think you know what's going on with them, because
Mhm.
that can change the result. And I mean, I was definitely taught different ways of checking to make sure that we're finding the accurate things. And usually whenever I find something with somebody or if it's emotional, they're like, "Oh yeah, like that's when my sibling was born," or "That's when like I was in this accident," or there's always something that is identified there. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and what a beautiful gift, to be able to provide that for people so that they can actually get to the root of their problems, and their perceptions about themselves. So
Yeah.
there's that area, and that I feel like that work helps people to become more aware of their multidimensional nature, which kind of takes me back to Mount Shasta here in this conversation about, the multi dimensions. And do you want to share maybe a story of an experience that you had on the mountain that helped to activate that awareness for you?
Mm. I mean, I'm thinking of a couple of the stories that I wrote about in my chapter. And I'll share the first story I had with um just a massive starship flying overhead. Um it so I share about this in my chapter, and so if anybody's listening to this, I encourage you to read my chapter. Um, but we had this experience. There was a group of us that were in the parking lot of Bunny Flats, and we were all sitting kind of in different cars, waiting for the other half of our group to come meet us. And I just felt this pull to look up, and I looked up, and I was like, that is not a plane. And it was this bright white light coming towards us, but the energy of it was so different than anything I had ever experienced before. And um it at pretty much the same time, all of us got out of our cars and were looking up at it as it was just coming over our head. And it was the most fascinating experience to me, because everyone all of a sudden had their arms up, and we were just like shouting, "We love you!" And I was like, "What is going on?" But it was so, it's like it just felt like everyone was like in pure, like their hearts were just open, and it felt like all of us were just celebrating like this moment together. And
Hmm.
it wasn't about anything else for me in that moment. And after it was gone, it pretty much just like disappeared, like
Was
into,
it dark or light outside? Was
this
it
was at
daytime?
night.
At
It
night?
was dark. Yeah.
Was
And
mm.
um since then I've had multiple experiences of ships like literally flying in and out of portals right in front of me. And um I just this like one particular experience, I just is so fascinating to me because of the, like, you can see it in my face. It was just such a loving experience in that moment, and there was so much,
Amazing.
just felt just so pure and joyful. um and I have had like some different experiences. The first time I ever saw any type of like UFO or ship was in was here in LA, actually. It was one like New Year's Eve. I was with a friend. We just went out to dinner, and our goal was to be like back home before midnight. And we saw five of these orange ships like flying over the Hollywood sign. And I just thought it was interesting to see them. And then yeah, I feel like Mount Shasta is just this hub of There's been nights where I'm looking up in the sky and it just looks like a UFO highway. Um, like they're all just busy doing whatever they're doing. Um,
Yeah, it's so interesting. And if you look long enough, you'll see that they operate. There are some that have a particular behavior, and some look different in how they move and how they flash and how, the size. And
yeah. And
so
there's some
there's
that
a
are they're
whole
stationed
highway
and
out there.
hmm yeah, I feel like and what I've noticed is there's some that are stationed or it's like they alternate and they take turns like being stationed in different locations.
Yeah, yeah, I would have to agree with that. But what speaks to me about this conversation, because plenty of people could have all kinds of skeptical arguments about what they see in the sky, there's no proof. But the fact that your group had this emotional response that just was heart activating and so precious, to me, that really speaks to kind of the heart of what Mount Shasta emanates, right? There's some presence, some mysterious presence about the mountain in particular that tends to attract and activate these expanded states and thus deeper understanding of who we actually are as beings beyond the physical.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Something that will also sometimes come up in my sessions, and I share a brief story about this in my chapter as well, is other beings will attach to our fields when if we've consented to something with them, or it could be even just subconscious. And I had this experience in a session with this woman where we had started an emotional process in healing this part of her that had made a decision about she was holding something against herself of just being, I think it was really like around being taken advantage of and feeling manipulated. And the moment we started this, I had this experience of seeing this gentleman that who had been with her stand up and walk out of the room. The door opened and closed. And this like flash of light came through when that happened. And a lot of times I don't see these things, especially to that degree. But I just thought that was really, really interesting. Is in chat, it just seems like things are they're just so much louder in Mount Shasta. And there's like I was saying when we first started talking, is there's this level of clarity in seeing things for what they are. Um, and I know a lot of people talk about that, like the veil just being thinner between dimensions in Mount Shasta. And I would say 100% that's my experience. That has been my experience there.
yeah, so subtitle of this book is Mount Shasta and the Emerging New Earth. So how do you perceive the new earth, whatever that is and means, and the relationship of the mountain to helping to be a part of that?
Yeah. I think, uh, like for me, I see a lot of the acknowledgement of what's really here and what is present around us in the things that we consent to or we don't consent to. And I see Mount Shasta really being a level of validation for these things that, people are like, hey, these things are here. And it's almost like in ways you can go to Mount Shasta to experience them if it's like even like a first time, maybe people have even thought about having these experiences, or they're curious and they're open to seeing more. And so I think when we talk about like the emerging new earth, I there's like this level of acknowledging the truth about what's here and us letting go of what we think we know and really being open to having like spirit show us what's here.
Mhm.
Um, and I think there's a beauty in there. I don't know if it, I mean, I feel like most people I've talked to that go to Shasta, they are so intuitively guided through that process. And I feel like earth, like our life here on earth is could be so powerful if humanity came together to allow ourselves to be intuitively guided and to be open to hearing like these messages of truth rather than, projecting our mind upon these things.
Mhm. Beautiful. Yeah. So this concept of intuition and this other thing that you mentioned in your chapter, direct knowing, as another source of perception.
Hmm.
So the five senses, then intuition and
Yeah.
direct knowing. Yeah. So I think that's a beautiful aspiration, for all people to come to.
Yeah.
And it is actually one of the things that I am dedicated to sharing and teaching is women activating their intuitive channels so that they can really come, we can come to trust that radar inside of us for a better world. I just know that if people were operating from that place, we'd be living in an entirely different world right now.
Right. Yeah. It's like just I think that's so beautiful, in that clarity of what it is that you're doing with women specifically, right? And like healing that level of whatever they've bought into that has kept them small or kept them quiet, um to know, to just to be in their knowing, right? And to know their channel. um I had an incredible question come forward yesterday, um about, it's like if you were playing a game, right, of not knowing. It's like what areas in your life, are you playing the game that you don't know? Because at the end of
Mm.
the day, I think the truth is we all do know. We're all connected to it. The question is, are we like tuned to it? Um, so I just
That's
think
good.
I think the biggest thing too is just acknowledging how much humanity creates their own suffering, right? And I think the
Mm.
emerging of the new earth is just being done with it. Just like we don't have to live in these experiences of suffering. And we don't have to consent to, these lower frequencies, um, residing with us. And I think there's such a beauty in what is happening. And I know we've talked about this before, but just in what you've seen, like in your lifetime of practice, um, how how all of it is just unfolding in a really beautiful way. Would
Yeah.
you add anything to that?
I'm sure I could. Yeah, when you said that, I immediately went to the fires in Los Angeles and the string of tragedies that keep unfolding on our planet. And it does make it challenging, this apparent dichotomy of this emerging activation of awareness and healing and understanding ourselves as part of in being an infinite being with the wisdom and the knowledge and knowing that we all have. And then there's this other stuff going on that is boggles the mind, regardless of what your particular belief system is about why these things are happening. Some people believe that there's orchestration behind that in a nefarious way. Some people will call it climate change. Some people just call it another tragedy, but the truth is, there's this is happening. I mean, that's ultimately the thing, right? This is happening. And at the same time as this awakening. So how we reconcile that inside of ourselves is an individual journey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I know I've recently been going through a shedding in that regard too with the fires. I had an experience where I was driving back from Westlake area where I have my office at. I see clients part-time there, and then I work with clients part-time online. And I was driving home and a new fire had been started. And I got stuck like in traffic on this hill. I was driving down the hill on the freeway and the smoke was just barreling up. And I can probably kind of hear it in my voice right now still. I've been recovering from it. But I had a, I felt it immediately that I was getting like something was happening in my body. It was like I felt like an immediate weakness just from breathing the smoke and not being able to go anywhere.
Mhm.
And I just kind of surrendered to the experience. And I went to the store and like got a couple like regimen things to take. But through this process, I kind of like made peace with what is happening, what's been happening, and the things that other people are choosing to participate in and be involved in. And I think the more difficult, acceptance sometimes when things are happening, there's this illusion that things are happening to us rather than things are happening for us. And I think that
Mhm.
only any individual that has, you know, lost their home or something, in these fires could even answer what that is for them. Um, and yeah, I, I'm with you on, it's sometimes it's hard to know what those things are, especially if we're not directly involved. But I definitely see and hear the messages for me. And sometimes I
That's
think
beautiful.
that's like one of the most powerful places that any of us could focus on is like, okay, well, what is my responsibility in this? And yeah,
Yeah, that's beautiful. Responsibility. So how you take all this experience, whether you're directly in the middle of it or not, and digest it into a learning, a
yeah,
teaching
definitely.
that
I mean, when I
change.
first heard about these things happening, I was grieving. I was angry. I was sad. I was shocked, and um it's a lot. Like there are places that have burned in LA that I've known, most of my life, or that I've gone to different, these different places. And um, yeah, it's been a very clearing and humbling experience in ways too.
Right. Yeah. So seems to be part of the design here on this earth anyway, that feeling of like, okay, is it like something devastating or in our personal lives or in the collective reality that seem to be these forces that we have potential to make medicine from, right? To take us to the next level. And maybe that is part of the new earth emerging. Yeah. Well, I'm going to wrap this up and really been a pleasure chatting with you. And is there anything else that you'd like to say? I will definitely put in the description here ways that people can contact you if they so desire. And of course, reading the book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful if you for those of you that are watching this to hear my story, and to get to share some of these things with you. Um, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, or even you just want to say hi. Um, I love connecting with you all, and yeah, thank you, Nisa.
Yeah, blessings.